Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Fandomology, where fandoms collide. And tonight is a very special episode of Beginner Series because the guy who brought the idea to revive Beginner Series has returned tonight. Baron Orman Tagge is with us. And not only that, but we are simulcasting to Baron's YouTube, Baron Orman Tagge's Fandom Legacy, and his Facebook page, which I actually didn't know that you could do that.
Yeah, I didn't know that either. I could even go to X if I wanted to, also known as Twitter. But I figured I need to give my Facebook page. I'm very bad with social media, to be honest with you. Cash, Mike, all these other ones said, "Hey, do you see what's going on the Twitter and all that?" And said, "No, not really. Sorry, I'm not that much of a social media type of creature. So I got to do a better job at that. So I thought, I might as well give some love to my Facebook.
Fair enough. Oh, excuse me. Now,
Sure.
Go ahead and get the elephant, addressing the elephant in the room here. I am a bit under the weather. I'm sure everyone can hear it in my voice. I will do my best to mute myself if I have to cough, but we'll still have fun tonight. And this is a stream that this was one of the ideas, Baron, that we had been talking about since the beginning of Beginner Series, and that's going through the Star Wars EU.
Right, yeah. I mean, everyone likes talking about the modern day Star Wars, modern Star Trek, all that. Ad nauseum, you might say.
Mm-hmm.
Really, honestly, it gets boring, especially when it's not that good of a topic. And of course,
exactly.
And of course, you brought this forward about the EU, and I thought, oh yeah, this is great to bring in. But again, you have a situation with the EU that gets done with ad nauseum. That's about 91 on, basically, like your page holder for the show tonight, showing Timothy Zahn's excellent trilogy. The Empire trilogy, or Thrawn trilogy, probably more apt to say. And as much as that really helped give a shot in the arm and give a new renaissance, it seems like a lot of the stuff before that really doesn't get talked about that much, or it's not really held in high regards, which is a shame, because there was a lot that, if it wasn't for what led up to that, you wouldn't have the things that Timothy Zahn would have brought forward with.
Right.
So, and even more so, Dark Empire, which came out roughly at the same time. Two concepts that came out about the same time, and got the green light, and done kind of simultaneously, slightly different time in the EU, which wasn't called that at the time. You had that different tier level of canon. You had like the S tier, C tier, all the way down.
With S tier, of course, being like the absolute top. That's basically the, at the time, 3 movies.
That is correct. Yes, the 3 motion pictures, and then like the next down would have been like the radio play, and I'm talking about like get that much beneath the movies was the radio plays by Daly, Star Wars, the 13 episode radio play on NPR, and the 10 Empire Strikes Back one. The Return of the Jedi not coming until late 90s, and airing just as unfortunately Daly passed from
right.
World, I might say.
So if we're going to start at the very beginning of the EU, we've of course got to start, I guess you could say, in the immediate aftermath of Star Wars, if we're going by its original name. Came out in 1977, and if I'm not mistaken, one of, if not possibly the first pieces of extended universe media. In fact, give me 1 second. I'm gonna bring this up here. Gotta reach for it.
He's a reaching.
Yeah. But one of the first pieces of Star Wars EU media is right here, Splinter of the Mind's Eye. And of course, those that have been following the channel know that I was doing streams actually reading this, and I'm going to try and bring this back at some point, but let's start here.
Well, actually, that wasn't the first, believe it or not.
Really?
It wasn't the first at all. In just a second here, I'm just going to bring up.
While you do that,
Yeah, let
Blazerhawk
me bring this
Darren
up here.
says,
I believe that.
I never read the Thrawn books, but too bad George didn't use this for the sequel trilogy before selling it to Disney.
Well, while I'm bringing this up here, one of the reasons why is George was not necessarily a big fan of Timothy Zahn's work. To be honest with you, he didn't like Mara Jade. He didn't. He actually found he did not like Mara Jade at all. Actually, he found Dark Empire comic book series closer to his vision, and that shows with the prequel trilogy, especially with. Have you ever heard of the Legend of Darth Plagueis the Wise?
Yes.
And when it comes down to the first piece of EU, you could sit back and see that was Star Wars. This right here, Star Wars #7, the first issue after the 6 issues that were printed that were serializing the movie. Excellently.
Okay.
And as you can see, this cover right here is just as bad, bad butted. I don't want to say bad words, but as you see the X-Men one where they have all the wanted posters and they're crossed through each one, and you have a couple of the mutants.
I think so, yeah.
Right, and then it's just as much that you got that wanted dead or alive Han Solo and Chewbacca, and it's like, well, you see this cover, and it's like, oh my word, what's going on here? And basically, it literally takes place right after the episode 4 of Star Wars, as we like to call it, and it follows Han Solo on a journey to deliver his money to Jabba the Hutt, H-U-T, not H-U-T-T, because somewhere along the line, the spelling, either changed or wasn't exactly, hey, this is how you spell it type of thing. And it also introduced the first EU villain, and that's Crimson Jack, who happened
is that the weird guy in the background behind Han Solo and Chewie?
No. That's just some alien that's on the cover. In fact, really, in some ways, the cover doesn't really hold that much to the story, other than the fact they did get into a little bit of a brawl because someone wanted to bury a Borg. Yes, a Borg on Spacer's Hill. And basically the reason why it's a Borg is a cyborg. Back then, even in issue 7, you were seeing that prejudice against those that did not, that were either cyborgs or even droids that we saw in Star Wars itself. And Han and Chewie helped this monk bury, and people didn't want him buried there. So there's a little bit of a scuffle, and it was needless to say they won. He got buried, and this leads into a series of stories on this planet. This is where he goes to after he runs into Crimson Jack. Crimson Jack is a pirate. He happened to find a Star Destroyer that was damaged and was able to salvage it up enough to use it as a base of operation using X-Wings, TIE fighters, what we've come now to call uglies in the Star Wars universe EU, and I suppose even in canon, all that fun stuff. But with that, when you had that, he basically took all the money away, and Han had to find a place to lay low. And this is a planet he went to, Abigail 5 or 3. Sorry, Abigail 3.
So question with that, is this the same adventure that he references in Empire Strikes Back when he talks about the bounty hunter on Ord Mantell?
Nope, nothing to do with that one. In fact, that actually gets addressed actually in the Sunday strips later on. As it went along, and many years later, when they were doing, there was dailies that were done with a Sunday recap, and then Al Williamson started doing just Sundays, and those were reprinted by Dark Horse Comics, and I think even Marvel now has redone them. And so that was part of the other EU that we were given, the daily strips and then the weekend strips and the funny pages. See, on the funny pages, you might say. So with that, that's what set off Han Solo on this mission. Now, what's great, and the reason why you're dealing with this Han going on his way, going on to another Magnificent Seven type of adventure, having this EU villain brought in, was Lucasfilm did a brilliant thing. They limited Marvel on what they could do. We don't want you using Darth Vader or even the Empire because we don't know what we're going to do with the next movie. Things were still, yeah. Remember, this is just coming off the end of Star Wars. The book you were talking about, Splinter of Mind's Eye, was a proposed script for a second Star Wars film in case Star Wars itself wasn't all that successful, a low budget one that they could use what they had and at least fire one off. Han Solo not being in that because Harrison Ford wasn't signed and they didn't think they could get him signed. So with that, Marvel was forced to have to come up with new villains. And with that, really opened the door to the Star Wars universe. You started, these new planets. The Star Wars universe started becoming bigger and bigger because of that. There were other dangers besides Vader and the stormtroopers and all this other stuff that would have been the officials. And and which would be good because just like the role playing game that just came out almost about 10 years ago, Edge of the Empire. That's what we're living on here. You're following Han Solo on the edge of the Empire. And with that, you're not necessarily going to have a high Imperial. And in contrast to when they revived Star Wars at Marvel under Disney, the first thing they did was, hey, let's have Luke meet up with Darth Vader. It's your typical trendy fanboy thing. Oh, we got to put them together. No.
It's basically just taking your action figures and just smashing them together.
Exactly. And here they were forced to have to think through stories, come up with ideas, flesh out villains and other heroes, which, of course, through this run that they had, you did. You had, of course, Jimmy, the Star Killer Kid, and his robot that were on the planet. And notice the important word, the Star Killer's kid. They were right off the bat. The next issue after this, you had the Star Killer Kid. They knew already that the Star Killer was already a name for what they're going to have Luke Skywalker, so they were using it. Of course, Force Unleashed, they used Star Killer again. And, of course, Jar Jar Abrams, not having the original bone in his body, goes, oh, we'll do Star Killer Station, our base.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, third time, boring. So you had that. You had a man who thought he was a Jedi Knight, but wasn't, and going off, taking the name Don Quixote and Don Juan Quixote, and using that because the man from La Mancha, not exactly up there. You had Jackson, the 6-foot-tall green meating rabbit, who, despite what people have been saying, George Lucas had no problem with him. Is actually one of the people at Marvel that had a problem with him, which is why he was never really brought back after this particular run. And one of the most important things, issue number 16, which was the first comic to not have any of our heroes in it. It was completely EU, which was a follow-up to this storyline and introduced one of the baddest bounty hunters, Valance, and who we discovered was a cyborg because he was a stormtrooper that got injured and became a cyborg and has a hatred of robots. And he was hunting down Jimmy the Star Killer Kid because he thought it was Luke Skywalker because he was hearing the legend. Oh, the moisture farmer who had a robot. Well, so he was wanting to, go and take out this Skywalker who is having robots as such a problem to him because of his hatred for him. Valance making 3 appearances in the original run of Star Wars. Great character.
Okay.
I mean, this is before Boba Fett. So this was this generation's Boba Fett, and he was mean.
I can imagine.
Oh yeah, he was absolutely great in that one. So,
real quick, how do you spell his name? I'm going to see if I can find a picture of him.
Like Liberty Valance. Yeah.
Like Richie Valens?
No, Valance.
Okay,
let's see.
I got it.
You found it? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
But that was he was a meanie. He was a meanie, definitely. So with that, we didn't see the Empire really show up uh, until like issue 24 or such, and even then, it was kind of a background type of thing. Uh, just a little brief Darth Vader trying to find out who this man was that destroyed the Death Star. And yep, that's
There he
him.
is.
hmm The Carmine Infantino artwork that he
Mhm.
had, uh, and that was from his second appearance in the Star Wars when he actually did meet up with Luke Skywalker.
Yeah,
So
that
we
is
had, yeah,
crazy. Like it almost looks like the Marlon Brando version of Jor-El if he turned
mhm,
evil
yeah,
and became a cyborg.
hmm exactly. And that's actually the cover rate there. Still only 35 cents, by the way, folks, for that issue. If you that went down to the drugstore and got your copy off the spinner rack. So, yep, there you go. In his first appearance on that, and even though we had our heroes in there, the only thing that they had was kind of just a flashback explaining that about Han Solo and such. But other than that,
Okay.
they were not characters in that. That was the first time we had none of our heroes in there. None of the heroes of Yavin, as we've come to call them. So these are kind of the important thing because these are items that started off that path of the EU. And why I think it's such brilliant storytelling because they had to make do with less. In other
Yeah.
words, they had less available to them, so they were able to have their creative energies flow. And out of that, the galaxy, like as I said earlier, expanded. Uh,
Hmm.
and continued growing and growing. And even when the Empire did get involved, you still had so much of a rogues gallery around.
Right. Like it wasn't just all the time Vader or Emperor Palpatine or Boba Fett or Thrawn. It was like, for one example, Prince Xizor from the Dark Empire. Wait, no, not Dark Empire. It's the
Shadow,
one that is Shadows of
shadow,
the Empire. That's what it is.
right. Exactly, and that's important. I mean, just like I was saying, Valance here only made 3 appearances. Well, if you want to count the one that they printed a few years back to close off the original Marvel run, 4. But in the first run, basically the first years, only 3 times, and he never made it to Empire Strikes Back era. Um,
Hmm.
and of course, that final battle was actually against Darth Vader himself. So
Wow.
yeah. So it was epic. It was epic, and they're both doing one thing, trying to find Luke Skywalker. Well, Valance already knew who Luke Skywalker was, but now he's trying to keep Vader from finding Luke. So it's kind of a change, you might say, in his outlook. And again, you can get these reprints. Marvel has them available in omnibus, or if you're lucky enough to get the Dark Horse omnibus, like I got, or the original issues, like I got Summers, because still unpacking. I don't
Of
know
course.
how long I can keep on saying that, but yeah, great storytelling, and hands down better than what we're getting now. Because again, it's like this is what happens when you have the adults playing in the
Hmm.
sandbox.
You don't
This
get
we
none of
have
that. There's no good. There's no evil. There's only power.
right. Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I mean, you got people have that attitude where there's only power, but really they are bad guys. You
Yes.
look across it, and you can see that Han Solo's life is a dangerous world that he's in. We already knew that in Star Wars, but now he's being thrown back into it. Of course, this started paralleling another storyline where they needed to find a new home for the Rebel base, and Luke Skywalker, who is a from a desert planet, happens to crash on a water world.
Oh boy. That
hmm
sounds
So,
that talk about fish out of water.
right, literally. So, I mean, everything kind of went and then came back together, and then led on to the next storyline, including a storyline that the first time we actually had the Clone Wars
Oh.
was in the original run. And Leia actually recounts to Luke a story that Bail Organa told her about Obi-Wan Kenobi during the Clone Wars time when he was traveling from point A to point B on board a ship, and
Mm,
the basically the adventure he had on that. Now, of course, you can take it for a grain of salt exactly how much, because again, it's a story. She's being told a story and she's recounting it.
of
So
course.
how historical it is, well, it might be very much historical, but it's fun, and of course, it's more of a trying to make Alec Guinness look younger than actually Ewan McGregor, because Ewan McGregor wasn't born at this time.
Hmm. Which,
It's more like Ewan McCool.
yeah. Which again, if you had a picture of that, I'd be interested in seeing that.
Oh, let's take a look here. Now you're really getting me going.
So while you're looking at that,
Mm-hmm.
around what time did Splinter of the Mind's Eye come out?
Splinter Mind's Eye came up 78 or so, I think it was.
Hmm.
Inside your book, it should say, if you take a look at the at the
Oh yeah, here
yeah.
here I'll show you right here actually.
Mm-hmm.
So I got this from my IT person at work.
Mm-hmm.
I think he got it secondhand, but
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
a little note right up here in the corner that says "Merry Christmas, Danny, 1978 from Aunt Judy."
Mm-hmm.
And
That was nice of her.
it was. But yeah, I don't see any publishing notes.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, here it is. Copyright 1978 by the Star Wars Corporation. So it
Right.
wasn't,
Yeah.
wow, it wasn't called Lucasfilm.
I mean, you did have your Lucasfilm, but yeah, it was definitely because obviously when Star Wars opened up, it had the Lucasfilm on it. But yeah, this was the Lucas the Star Wars company. I love that. And Alan Dean Foster, who was the author of that book, also was the
Hmm.
ghostwriter of the original Star Wars.
Right. Also, by the way, hello to Chris
Oh,
and Virginia, who says, "Ah, yes, the book
cool.
you never finished reading to us." I'm going to. We're bringing those streams
Oh,
back.
oh, that's sad. That's sad. Sad. But yeah, I mean, and as it goes, actually, the Splinter of Mind's Eyes is a very curious creature, because it was it was a good story. I wouldn't have, I don't think it would have been a good movie, but it was a good story. It was kind of apocrypha, because in that you had, of course, Luke and Vader meeting in there.
Hmm.
Uh, but with it doesn't fit in the continuity. It's one of
No.
those where I've always called it a bit of apocrypha, that certain elements did happen, but the whole story obviously couldn't have had.
Right. Like it definitely couldn't happen with Return of the Jedi in there, because it makes very pointed references to how attracted Luke is to Leia.
Oh yeah, oh most definitely, because they didn't know that they're going to be brothers and sister until Return of the Jedi. Can't forget that. Can't forget that big kiss
Exactly.
that he got. So, uh, yeah, we won't go there. Maybe I don't
Yeah,
know.
we don't need to touch that. But
Not any stretch of the imagination. But again, that was all part. I mean, in the beginning, we didn't know that Luke was going to be the son of Darth Vader. Even with Empire Strikes Back, we didn't know if he was or not.
right, because even the people on set didn't know until literally the day they shot the scene.
Mm-hmm. Right, and during the original Star Wars, they didn't have any idea. So everything was
Yeah.
going along. It was that's how it was going to be. It was like he was Darth Vader. He killed Luke's father, And then now we have that. We had a little bit of doubt, even if that was going to be the case. Could Vader be lying? Because Obi-Wan would never lie, would he? From a
True.
point of view. And then they throw in Leia, being his sister, which really changes a lot of things in the Star Wars universe. So, with that, so that was your first book. The comics were your first introduction into the EU. Kenner came out with the first EU toy, and that was the Imperial Troop Transport, which Phony Baloney used in The Mandalorian, a revamped version of that to transport troops around. That was that basically tankish land speeder.
Oh yeah, that's right. I know. I know what that's talking about.
Right. So, I mean, in the beginning, you had them already expanding in other areas that weren't part of the film, and they're finding out they're becoming extremely, extremely popular.
Yes.
They're being caught on. It wasn't one of these things where that, it wasn't the movie. Why do we care? Why do we care?
Real quick, Chris says, "Have you read the Darth Bane trilogy?" I have
No,
not, but Trevor has.
Yeah, I have not myself. About that time, a lot of that stuff were coming out. Life got in the way. So
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But, so in 1978, though, I know another important, infamous piece of Star Wars EU came out, the Star Wars Holiday Special, which we don't need to go into. We don't need to go into the reputation of that. We've already documented it on the channel, but it's still important, right?
It's really important. And one, you could actually watch it more times than The Last Jedi.
Yeah.
Yeah. So with that, I mean, but all joking aside, it was extremely important in the factor that, one, it introduced us to Chewbacca's family that made a big impact into the EU.
Yes. Also, real quick, old man, this is for you.
Oh. And you wanted to see what the cover of that one issue looked like. There it is.
Oh, wow.
Right. Ben Kenobi fights alone, silent drifting. There we go.
Yeah, he looks almost like royalty in that.
Right. Now, of course, that's not exactly how he looked in the comic per se, because things when they went into the from here into the book, but I mean, it's pretty close to the representation he had of. He didn't really have his robes in there. He had like a one-piece jumpsuit when he was in the actual story itself. But yeah, it's an all-new, untold tale. Ben Kenobi fights alone, of course. Obi-Wan Kenobi, issue 24. Boom.
And is that C-3PO behind him?
No, that's RK-40. RKO. I'm sorry, RKO 40 or 40 RKO. 40 RKO. It was a droid that was on board the ship that was assisting.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
It was kind of a little bit of a mystery type of thing, investigation, you might say, of things that was going on, and the droid was more than happy to assist him. And it was the RKO series droid, and only appearance of that droid, and the only time we saw the Clone Wars in this. Obviously, you didn't see any clones, you didn't see any wars. You just had this one adventure, which is, why Lucasfilm was more than happy to let this one slide.
Of course. And real quick, hello to Daryl, who says Splinter of the Mind's Eye, excellent book. And hello to Black Dragon. And of course, Darren says Obi-Wan still has the high ground. Always does.
Yep, he does. I mean, yeah, Obi-Wan, I wouldn't want to sit back and say was ruthless in this one, but yeah, he definitely made sure he wasn't one-upped on in this book. There's
right.
No problem at all. And yeah, and Splinter of the Mind's Eye, going to that one, was a great book for being a novel and all that. And they did make it into a comic later, 4-issue comic. beautiful illustrations and all that. It gave us the Kyber crystal, which was spelled differently and wasn't like what we see as a Kyber crystal today. I'm
Right.
not gonna spoil anything because you're reading the story to people inside the chat here, so I'm not going any further on that. But
Okay.
but it's a good story. And it gave us a look of where Star Wars could have gone at one time if it wasn't a big enough success that it became. Or
So
shall
with
I
that,
say phenomenon.
let me ask you a question. If
Hmm.
they indeed had made Splinter of the Mind's Eye into a movie
Hmm.
and it was like massively successful to where they had to do another, was there more story that they could tell?
I don't know. I don't know what was the plan then. Um, I don't think it would have been that massively successful. To be honest, I hate to say, because again, you're taking away two of the very most popular characters, Han and Chewie.
Yeah.
But being that they're not in there, was basically Luke, Leia, and the droids were the only ones, and it's hard to imagine not having Han and Chewie along with it. I mean,
Yeah.
look how
Because
empty Episode 7 was without Luke involved with everything in that. So
exactly. And real quick, Chris says, not sure if this came up when you guys discussed the Thrawn trilogy. We actually hadn't yet, but
nope,
those books are the original source of the name Coruscant.
that you're correct, sir. Yeah, and I've been purposely wanting to stay away from that because a lot of people always talk about Era of the Empire on. The
Mhm.
early stuff doesn't necessarily get touched on, you might say. But yeah,
Right.
the original name, Lucas originally had planned for the name of Had Abadan for the home.
Had Abaddam.
Yeah, Abadan. Yep, Abadan. That was
Okay.
going to be the actual name for it. When it came to Era of the Empire, uh, Zahn didn't know that, and he came up with Coruscant, like a shining crystal.
Hmm.
And when the prequel trilogy is coming around, well, George wanted to change it back to Had Abadan. He had to be talked out of that. One of the things he was actually talked out of with the trilogy prequel, because as ASAP said, this is too ingrained. This is just too ingrained in Star Wars lore right now. It's going to have to stay Coruscant. Uh, Actually, the name was called Coruscant, and
Hmm.
so that was the big change that George had. It's going to be called not Scant. So
Yeah. And Daryl says it wasn't until the Phantom Menace that we learned how to pronounce it.
yeah, the proper one was Coruscant before that. But if you want to take a look at it, both is correct because look at all the different pronunciations of the same name, even with the United States. You have Washington, you have Washington. I don't know where they get the
Yeah.
R. Washington.
There's
So it's like,
there's a there's and Phil likes to point this one out. Arkansas and Arkansas.
mhm, yep, yep.
Or the one city in my state he likes to pick on. There's Stanton, which is the correct one, Phil,
Mhm,
versus Staunton.
mhm. Right. So, I mean, both I think are perfectly legitimate ways to pronounce that name. I mean, it wasn't until way late that that I found out that it was the executor, not the executor, because it's like, well, it says executor. No, it's the executor. Oh, okay.
Right.
Executor sounds cooler, man. It really sounds cooler.
Hmm. So, of course, we know that in 1980 we get Empire Strikes Back, and that
Mhm.
changes a whole bunch of things
Right.
for Star Wars as a whole.
Mhm.
How does those reveals change the EU then going forward?
Well, first of all, before you walked into it, you had a fantastic, I don't want to call it a trilogy, but a 3-book series by Daly, and it's these right here. You know,
Ooh,
The Star's End, Revenge, and The Lost Legacy, taking place roughly about, roughly about 2 years or so before uh, the first film, uh, going through the voyages of Han Solo, and just like the Marvel run of Star Wars, he didn't have much Imperial interference. That's where the corporate sector came from.
Okay.
And that's where they went into the corporate sector, and they had their little voyage, their little adventures in there. Star's End was a prison, of course, revenge, basically against slavers, and then the one that did get them back into the Empire, the Lost Legacy, that's where Zim the Despot came from, if you remember hearing the name of that, and hence also the Crystal Skull on there, the original real Crystal Skull, not the other one that that was made a good film because of Indy 5.
Okay.
Brian Daly doing those 3 books, and I tell you, you read those books; they're so well written. You can actually hear Harrison Ford's voice when you're reading those reading those lines of his in there,
I
and
believe it.
and that's where the Z-95 Headhunter comes from. The Victory class Star Destroyer came from that. So now you're starting to see things that we take for granted in the EU from this.
Okay.
So the Z-95 showed up in the Clone Wars series finally, having their big on-screen appearance. The Victory, even though it hasn't shown up on screen, everyone knows what a Victory is. It was the Star Destroyer before the Imperial class.
Right. Real quick, Black Dragon says, Baron, you look like you take care of your books like I do.
I try. I try. I really try. Actually, I've never. I picked these up at a bookstore. This is, and never really looked at these much. I have a newer copy, which was the omnibus version of that. So, but that one looks a little more tattered. But then again, it was they didn't. The printing job wasn't so good on that. So, but
Gotcha.
I've read those. But I've read that series at least 3 times because it's a good series. It really is. You had their version of a droid, Bollocks, in Blue Max, and they joined his adventure for the whole 3 books. And yeah, it's wonderful. You actually had war droids in there, Zim's war droids from 25,000 years ago, before the Republic was started. And so again, they weren't limiting themselves. They had this entire galaxy, and you have 1,000 generations. Well, they were willing to use it. If we're going to have an epic spanning story here in universe storytelling, they're doing it, which is sorely so missed today because they keep it so micro now.
Yeah, it's all focused around the original trilogy, either before it or after it.
Or more importantly, the road to the sequel trilogy. And it's such, so everything's so pigeonholed in this little thing. They've been so successful to make the Star Wars universe small, and it's not. And so even this day, the comic book series, the Han Solo series. I mean, when they say Stars In, we're talking about someplace that's at the edge of the universe, which is why it's Stars In prison. So Han was all over the place. When he says, I've been one end of this galaxy, the other, Brian Daly took it serious. He took it absolutely serious on that one. And so that brought that there. The next one that came about, of course, let's move before that, and L. Neil Smith's Lando Calrissian series.
Okay.
The Mind Harp. Oh, not in order. Mind Harp, which is the first one. The Flame Winds, and of course the Star Caves of San Boca. And
wow.
in this one, he had a droid by the name of Vufi Ra. So forget that one that they put in Solo. But as it goes, he had Vufi Ra, who was a pacifist pilot droid, mind you, shaped like a starfish. So, I mean, L. Neil Smith even took one step further. Let's make a droid that isn't even humanoid in appearance. It has 5 arms. The chair had to be taken out, what would be Chewie's chair, so he can be fitted on there properly to do his piloting jobs. He'd basically have like a little nervous breakdown if he was forced to have to do any violence. And
wow.
of course, Right, and as it goes along, you find out more about Vufi Ra and what he's about, and which of course comes to the end, of course, in that Star Cave of Sambolka, and just like all these names, again, it's wild. It brought us the uh, it brought us the ooh, I hate when I have mental blocks.
Real quick, while
The
you're pulling that up, we got
mm,
a visit from Phil McCracken who says, "What the heck is
oh,
this? This isn't Pop Talk, and where's that no money, cash money?"
we fired him.
And Black Dragon says, "Book recommendation for Baron, Star Trek Blackfire by Sonny Cooper."
Oh yeah, I'm familiar with it. Mhm. And no, and Lando wasn't. In fact, in that, Lando Calrissian was too busy trying to stay alive instead of going out there and even trying to charm the ladies, you might say. He
Exactly.
was young. He was going out there experiencing. In fact, in the first book, they make mention about how he didn't have a mustache yet. And he also made mention that he wasn't a good pilot. That's why he had to have Vufi Ra.
Hmm.
And that's what brought out there. Of course, these books came out about 1980, and the other ones came out after it. Uh, let's see, when did the Lando one came out after that? Even though it takes place before that, and that was 83. So uh, the daily books came out. Empire Strikes Back, and of course the L. Neil Smith, the Lando Calrissian ones came out about Return of the Jedi. And
Okay.
if anyone wants to sit back and say that Lando Calrissian wasn't liked, you wouldn't have to read books centered around him if he wasn't liked.
Exactly. He was a cool character.
Yeah, people loved Lando Calrissian
Mm-hmm.
right from the beginning. Now, with that, along came also the Star Wars radio play and the Empire Strikes Back radio play. So, how does it start affecting this EU? Well, for the 3 years between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, holding pattern. Just like you had after Star Wars and Lucasfilm saying, don't talk about these things. Uh, it was kind of like, well, what do we do now? Uh, so, again, Vader was limited in a lot of his appearances, but he's had a little bit more Imperial activity. So he got to meet new Imperials in there. Uh, One of the great things, of course, with the uh, holiday special was, besides meeting Chewie's family, was your first on-screen appearance of Boba Fett,
Exactly.
which was a bane to Lucas because it's going to sound cruel, but all Boba Fett was to George Lucas was a plot device. He wasn't even a character; he was a plot device. The big thing for Boba Fett was to get Han Solo off the movie and have a plausible way for him not to Return to the Jedi if Harrison Ford got really uppity and decided not to want to return.
Right.
And so that's all he was. And you take a look at the amount of time and the very limited amount of dialogue he had. That's all he was. But he was just so freaking cool. In fact,
If
in
I'm
the
not mistaken, didn't he only have 5 lines in the entire original trilogy?
just about, and then I don't think that's even including the scream in Return of the Jedi, which was
Right.
basically the only audible thing you heard from Boba Fett in the Return of the Jedi. But it didn't stop people from expanding on the legend of Boba Fett. So we didn't see Boba Fett. We didn't see Han Solo. Lando and Chewie were on the road trying to find him. But lo and behold, issue 68 of the Marvel comic books came out. And he had this cover.
Okay.
And it's
Oh,
like,
wow.
okay,
I
now,
like that.
right. But that's not Boba Fett. That was the first appearances of Mandalorians besides Boba Fett. And
Okay.
they were introduced as what we were all being told, teased by. In fact, you can kind of tell a little bit on the pauldron there. It doesn't exactly look like Boba's.
Yeah.
And just like we were all being told by Lucasfilm and all that, that they were super commandos during the Clone Wars.
Mm-hmm.
And we come across 3 members of those commandos in that story. And again, they're trying to find Han. Obviously, this ends up going down basically a dead end, but we get a little bit at that time more of a backstory of not necessarily Boba Fett per se, but what Boba Fett was.
Okay.
Obviously, that all went down out the window by the time you had Episode 2.
Right.
Attack of the Clones. But that was how popular obviously was. They had to find a way to bring Boba Fett in somehow without bringing Boba Fett in.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, Luke is still kind of reeling a little bit. He's, it's like, it's his father, but they didn't necessarily dwell on it. And he did have flashbacks to stories with Han Solo in a few issues, especially issue 50, which was, obviously a 50th issue. Boom, there it is. It's going to be like a double-sized 3-part story inside there, and one of those parts was the middle part was recounting adventure Han and Chewie had that pertained to the whole thing. So you had some of that where it was kind of a flashback, but we didn't have Han. It was Lando and Chewie going along there, but it worked. It worked. And you had new things like the one thing that really gave Lucasfilm kittens was they came up with they wanted to do a second Death Star,
which in hindsight I think we kind of agree maybe wasn't the best idea.
Well, but the thing is they come up with it. Lucas gets that and go, no, you can't do another Death Star. So instead, they did something called the Tarkin, kind of a scaled-down battle station that didn't look anything like the Death Star. But they didn't realize how close they were to what a central topic or theme for Return of the Jedi was. How to find out what the next one was going to do without, just by stumbling across it literally.
Exactly.
So you had that. So a lot of the stories were, okay, we're in flux. We don't know what we're going to do. So now we're going to have to be, again, that important word, creative. We can't rest on the laurels of everything that we've been spoon-fed already. We have to make new things, new villains. In the original run leading up to The Empire Strikes Back, they came up with a villain that comes to a little bit to my heart. And right there.
Baron Orman Tagge.
Baron Orman Tagge.
Real quick, the name, the little icon that I used in the thumbnail and that you've used before, is that actually him?
Yeah, the Carmine Infantino's drawing. Yes, that is Baron Orman Tagge. He is, originally he was going to be the brother of General Tagge on the Death Star,
and he was the one. Just for the record, General Tagge was the one that was actually recommending to be cautious about the rebels, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Right. The artist got it kind of screwed up, and we're drawing him looking like Admiral Mahdi, who was the cocky one.
Right.
But as it went down, they made that the tag that they brought in there, because they brought the character in. They brought the character back. But now they made it that, okay, the tag that was on the Death Star was a cousin. The one they were pushing as the kind of the younger brother, that they were trying to hint was the tag on the Death Star. Wasn't, but he was an Imperial officer. And that's where you had Tagge go to the House of Tagge. Anything that's associated with Tagge in the Star Wars universe comes from that. And he had a grudge. He had no love for the rebellion. But he had no love for Vader because Vader took a swipe at his eyes with a lightsaber and blinded him, which is why he has those glasses on. Not these glasses, but the ones that's in that picture.
Okay.
On that. And that's basically he had Geordi's visor before Geordi had his visor type of thing. And that was the only way he could see.
Right.
So
I'm bringing that picture up right now.
Right
I'm sure everyone who knows the guy here on the panel with me knows this picture, but for those that don't, this is what we're talking about.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, that's it. Again, the great art by Carmine and Fantino. They even brought him back into Disney, but they really ruined, again, taking all these great characters, Disney just found a way to really crap on them. Whether it's Balance and Tag and all the others. But yeah. And, he's the head of the corporation. And he basically was the main antagonist for like the last portion of the Star Wars comics leading into the Empire Strikes Back. His storyline comes to, and just when they did the serialization in the comics of the Empire Strikes Back. So, but a great character, and his sister still made an appearance even after that, because she had it out for Luke and was not happy that. Well, we won't get into that. Read the comics. Find the comics. They're great. They really are. Anyone who sits back and says that these comics are subpar, it probably were told that and never read them. But again, like the reasons why I sat back and said, they went out and they had to create new things and make this universe bigger.
Okay.
And in some ways, I don't think we'd have the rich EU we would have if it wasn't for, well, heck, the comic run, or even Splinter of the Mind's Eye, or even the Han Solo series.
Oh, I'm sure.
Now, right, are the novelizations and of the movies. And really, that was the end for like novelizations that you had. Basically, Return of the Jedi came out for the novelization, and you didn't have a book come out until, novel-wise, that is, until Timothy Zahn. The comics came to an end in issue 107. You had a company called Blackthorn that tried doing 3 issues, black and white 3D comics, and they're okay. They're pretty okay, but it never caught on. And the comics didn't come back really until, boom, you had Dark Horse doing Dark Empire. Right. But we did have little things like this. This was our guidebook back then. This came out roughly, as you can see, with the Return of the Jedi. But what's important about this is not only did they touch the 3 films, they touched the daily books, they touched the Coruscant books, and they touched Splinter of the Mind's Eye. So already those books were being wrapped up into the lore, into what would eventually become like Star Wars Encyclopedia.
Okay.
And this was 1983.
Wow.
You didn't necessarily have, this is 1984, this book came out. This is my second copy. I have another copy is well read. This is the second one I picked up. That's not as well read, but obviously, if we wanted to know more about Star Wars, boom, we're going through there. Yeah, it had errors and such like that because they didn't have exactly the source material to go on for some of this stuff. But they were enough to sit back and tell us the differences between red and blue squadrons. That in the book. In the novelization was Blue Squadron because that's what Luke's squadron was going to be, but they turned into Red Squadron, and all that stuff. So it's like a little history encyclopedia book. It's a guide. It's a true guide.
Okay. Now, question. So question then. All of these different characters that we've brought up, so Valance or Baron Orman Tagge, why do you think George Lucas never wanted to put them in the movies?
Okay, spoiler alert.
Hold on, I got a clip for that.
They died.
Oh, okay.
Unlike Disney, they're more than happy when the character got killed off. They got killed off.
Okay.
Crimson Jack died, and so did his sidekick Jolly. Queeg, who was on the water planet, died. Senator Greyshade on the wheel, which again, that was a great storyline, died. Baron Orman Tagge died. So these villains, these bad guys, and even some good guys, Valance died. So these people died in the comic. Well, why would they be brought back at all? And even then, this was not part of Lucas's overall story. This is part of what we now call extended universe. They exist in the universe, but they weren't necessarily movie ready. It's just like we never saw Thrawn in the prequel trilogy.
Right.
Tim Zahn said he would have loved it if you just would have had a character walking by with glowing that was blue with glowing green eyes, blue eyes, red eyes. I mean, and it's like, oh, yeah, that's a young Thrawn on Coruscant. But like I said, Lucas wasn't necessarily a big fan of Zahn's work. Obviously, he would have to acquiesce that Zahn helped launch it out there, but he wasn't the only source.
Right.
I would argue to say that the thing that really helped taking it off was West End Games. In 1987, we had the 10th anniversary of Star Wars, and Star Wars was a dead creature. About 1985, Star Wars was dead. You had, you had attempts to keep it alive. You had the 2 Ewok films, which were released in Germany, by the way, in the theaters. And
Crazy.
Yeah.
Which, real quick, on the Ewok movies, if you have not seen them, I do recommend them, especially Caravan of Courage.
Mm-hmm.
I love them both, but if I had to pick one over the other, I'm going Caravan of Courage over Battle for Endor all day.
Right. And that kind of thing, though, they didn't necessarily resonate. They didn't really catch on. They didn't really grab people because, again, at about that time, you had Star Wars fatigue. Sound familiar, everybody? You had and now you had the Droid animated series, which was I don't want to say dumbed down, but more aimed for the teen set and such. And you can see it on Disney Minus, and they did come out with put it on DVD or most of it on DVD. And they're fun to watch. Those I think they have an important piece. Boba Fett even makes an appearance in there. And they're fun. If you take for what it's worth, they're fun. And then you had the Ewok animated series, which is definitely for even younger set and probably even made more for girls, which is no problem with that, mind you. But they only lasted like about a season or so, and again, Star Wars was dying. So by the end of '85 or so, Kenner quit making toys. The comic book Marvel run ended. No one was really running to the animated shows or even those movies, those Ewok movies. So it was in a sense dead. We didn't even know if we were going to have a prequel the way things were going, especially what Lucas was saying, and Lucas seemed to be making it kind of known he was done. He was done. We have a good series here. But in 1987, West End Games, which was a small publishing outfit, and they had some very respectable games like Paranoia. They even did the Ghostbusters role-playing game. They were able to get the rights to Star Wars for a song to do as a role-playing game. So they did what any decent game planner, lover of Star Wars, all across the board, armed with all the novels, comics, and even something like this.
Yeah.
And all the production drawings that they could get their hands on, everything like that. They took Star Wars and literally expanded it. This is when you had that big push, the big expansion. That's where you started having like their galaxy guides, where you started getting the names of the races and the individual characters that you saw. We didn't know until 1987-88 that Greedo was a Rhodian, or that the Hammerheads were Ithorians, or any of that. No, we didn't know that. When we had the toys, it was Greedo, it was Hammerhead, it was Walrus Man, it was Snaggle. That was what they called them, right? But here they go and they grab this. They flesh out the characters such as Tagge and Mahdi, and
Hmm.
even Karkin himself and other officers, in there, because the first Galaxy Guide was A New Hope, because at that time was being called A New Hope.
Hmm.
But also the Cantina people in there. They fleshed out the fact that the Cantina was owned by a Wookiee who didn't like droids. It fleshed out many of the other aspects and started bringing in names. It was also where you got the name YT-1300. Actually, the Westing Games, that is. Basically, the two books that came out, you had the role playing game and you had the source books that came out back to back for the 10th anniversary. And the source book, you had the YT-1300. The first time the name class of the Millennium Falcon was basically officialized,
Okay.
and basically was known that since then. You had some fan outfits trying to come up with names for the Millennium Falcon with blueprints and such, but no. And they did that. Then they brought back, again, using that book, they brought back the Victory class, and they're using some of the older designs that they had for the Imperial Star Destroyer to represent that, which is why you have kind of those wingish type aspects to it.
Of
And
course.
in all across it, and bringing back the Z95 Headhunter, and so there was giving the stuff that we already had in all those novels new life. And when Timothy Zahn did go to do his novels and get the okay, he got a package with basically uh, the two books that I said there, the Imperial Source book.
Hmm.
Uh, I don't know if the Rebel Source book was out yet or not, but they sent a bunch of the stuff from West End Games for reference. At first, Timothy Zahn was kind of beside himself. It's like, what the hell are you doing, sending me this garbage for? Don't they know? And then he started looking at those stuff. And he goes, these guys have taken so much work off of my hands of research that I would have had to have done, and that's why those things were incorporated into his novels.
Of course.
Many of the ships and all that were straight from West End Games. Species names and such out of West End Games. The only thing that really he had to do, because at that time they didn't have a name for the Imperial planet, not even had Abadan, they were calling it Imperial Center. And then you had Imperial City on Imperial Center. So it's like, well, I got to come up with a name for the planet. So he came up with Coruscant. But yeah, the Lancer class frigates, the Carrack class, of course, all across the board, the Black Force, the Dark Force Rising, the Dreadnoughts, all that, were because of West End Games. So they were probably one of the most important aspects to EU, even coming into the quote unquote new canon that we have today, because how much of that stuff crept over
Oh,
into what they have.
a lot.
Incredible,
We still use the names, for example, of the ships even today.
right? Hmm. And so, and that started that symbiotic relationship where everybody was try to keep everything together. As much as they want to sit back and say about all the errors and garbage like that, the biggest problem that you had uh, with the old EU was not the authors and writers, but
Hmm.
Lucasfilm itself. Lucasfilm put out a timeline for people to have, and basically that timeline had the Clone Wars and the Fall of the Republic at two different times. Whereas we know in Revenge of the Sith, it happened at the same time. You
Of
actually
course.
had the activation dates of 3PO and R2D2. They're by the time that you saw them in Star Wars, they were over a century old.
Hmm.
Uh, R2 being the older of the two. None of this Anakin built him on Tatooine type of thing, or I like to think rebuilt him. So
Okay.
when they had that, they were going off of what material that Lucasfilm was wanting to give them. And they had, of course, don't touch on the Clone Wars. We don't want you to touch on the Clone Wars. George has plans. George has plans. Please don't, So again, you had that ambiguousness. But if they decided to change something in Lucasfilm, that's what threw things in Higgly Piggly land with the continuity. But they tried doing the best they can with retcon because they were forced to do it because of George, not because of
Right.
per se. Unlike Disney, when they came forward with their haughty attitude that we're going to start fresh and we're never going to have these problems at all.
And now look at them. They're literally, for example, in Bad Batch, retconning the death of Asajj Ventress in the Dark Disciple novel.
They're retconning a lot of things. They're retconning so across the board, all across the board. They can't keep their storyline straight, and I knew they weren't going to be able to. But I rolled my eyes, and I guess I'm a little bit more harsh with them on that because they had such a haughty, arrogant attitude and insulting attitude, especially the people like us and those of us that love the old EU. That it's like, yep, I'm waiting. It's going to happen. Yep.
But remember, Baron, according
is.
to Kathleen Kennedy, they don't have volumes upon volumes of books to make movies off of.
Yeah, you know why? Because I got them on my bookshelf. No, I mean, really, I mean, my bookshelves are creaking with all my Star Wars reference stuff. They're there. It's always been there. It doesn't take much. Plus, Bob Iger threw away the most important aspect. Those were the treatments that Lucas had. So it's been there. This organically grew over 30 years. So when you got to 1987, the biggest organic growth happened, and that was West End Games. And they did, several Galaxy guides, but the first 6, basically 1, 3, and 5, dealt with the movies. Number 2, no, sorry, yeah, 1, 3, and 5. 2 had to do with Bespin. 6 had to do with tramp freighters.
Right.
So if you wanted to be a tramp freighter like Han Solo, that was the Galaxy guide you had. But what did they do with each one of those? Oh, there we go. Yeah, there we go. Oh, those are also beautiful to look at. But
they are, especially that one I just pulled up with the Falcon flying amongst the TIE fighters.
That was their last revision book, official one that came out from them. It's kind of a little bit of the harder one to get now. I think it's, if you want to try to get it, I think it got a little bit of money to it. But that came out about the time they were coming to the end of their licensing, before Phantom Menace. Unfortunately, they lost their license before Phantom Menace, and then went to WotC, Wizards of the Coast. But so they were naming characters. I mean, a lot of the characters that we know of now in backstories we know of in Empire Strikes Back came from the Galaxy Guides. Yeah, we had Major Derlin, but they fleshed out Derlin. They fleshed out General Veers. They fleshed out Admiral Peart. They fleshed out Ozzel and Captain Nita. Because, let's face it, these people only had like a brief moment. You want to know how? Yeah, I mean, they fleshed out our bounty hunters because we didn't know anything about these bounty hunters. Nothing. Not a thing. They just look cool on the set. You had this, what they call the Fluto droid, and that was IG-88. Well, what the heck is one of those things? And they fleshed out the whole story of IG-88. They fleshed out Zuckuss in 4 LOM. They fleshed out Dengar and his beef that he had with Han Solo. Of course, they had Bosk on there and the beef that he had with Chewbacca, and how Trandoshans, or Trandoshans, however you want to pronounce, and Wookiees don't get along with each other. And will more than happy rip each other's throats out if they have a chance when they meet. So again, they fleshed all that out. You didn't have that. You didn't even have that in the comic books. None of that. Their plot devices, including Boba Fett. And the big thing that they're doing, the most important thing with Boba Fett, they're keeping him mysterious through the whole thing. When you had Boba Fett, it was still keeping him because the less you knew, the bigger the character he was. And just like Judge Dredd, you never took his helmet off.
Exactly. So, and real quick, I want to highlight this. I brought it up earlier. Chris says Kathleen Kennedy is the reason why Disney is failing with Star Wars, yet they still keep her around.
Well, yes and no. Yes and no. I agree partially, but it's also her party of sycophants, and that even includes David Filoni, all of them across the board. One of those I really have anger and spite towards is Pablo Hidalgo. And the reason why is one of the people who wrote for West End Games and did some wonderful EU backstory, including one on the history of the R series droids from the R1 up to the R7. No, so R2D2, R5D4, the R3 units, the R4 units, the R6 units, all that. He wrote an excellent one for what they call the Star Wars Adventure Journal. And a few other articles that he wrote, which means he knows his stuff. He
Yeah,
wrote the stuff, some of the stuff. So he knows it. And what does he do when he goes with Disney and all that? Basically uses what he wrote as toilet paper and insults the fans.
hmm
So I guess I have even more spite towards him than Kathleen Kennedy, because I read, I got it right there. I got the stuff right there, and and it's still reference to those. Nowadays, I kind of cringe a little bit, but it's like, no, this stuff is still good. It's just the guy himself turned into a schmuck. That's why I
exactly.
call him. That's why I call him Pablum Hidalgo. But uh, he was such a great contributor to the Star Wars EU in giving us richer, deeper lore that went on to Wizards of the Coast for role playing games, even going into Fantasy Flight games leading up to the sale to Disney. So, as much as, yeah, it's great to throw rocks at Kathleen, figuratively, Facebook, figuratively. Um, there's a whole slew of others that should know better, that do know better, but they got 30 pieces of silver as well.
Exactly.
And
And
all the way to Filoni, Filoni Baloney. I mean, I am not leaving any thing back on him either, because again, he knows the stuff. He
mhm,
was in the EU when he was doing the Clone Wars series, right?
yeah,
Because at that time it was still, it was still Lucas, right? It's still Lucas, so this stuff was being incorporated in some fashion or another into the EU.
exactly.
So he knows, he knew, and
But
whatever differences you had again. And the one thing I will defend Filoni on, again, just like I said before about how things didn't mesh up sometimes continuity wise. You had George Lucas coming down from on high telling David, hey, I want this. Ahsoka is George Lucas's idea. It wasn't Filoni's. Filoni just went with it. And at first he got the heat for it, and now he's getting all the praise for it.
mhm,
But again, it goes to Lucas. Lucas goes, hey, I want Anakin to have a Padawan, and that Padawan is Ahsoka, and this is what I want. And Filoni went with it. And Lucas would come down and say, I want to have a story about this. I want you to make it go. So he's giving it, and he's got to obviously give us okay because it's still his baby. So the Lucasfilm, the actual Lucas years of Clone Wars, if there are things you weren't necessarily happy with, well, you can go to the top as well. Really, to be honest.
right.
But the
And
thing is Filoni should know better.
right. But
Mhm.
sadly, he's just become another bootlicker to Disney and Kathleen Kennedy. See, I'm kind of like you where I don't 100%, at least anymore, place the blame on Kathleen Kennedy. A few years ago, back when I started this channel, yes, I was under the impression that Kathleen Kennedy was the sole reason that Star Wars
Mhm.
sucked nowadays, and that if you get rid of her, everything would be okay. I don't believe that anymore.
Right. Mhm.
It's Disney as a whole.
Right.
Disney as a whole is no longer making it for the sake of just telling a good story. They're making it trying to milk the cash cow, and the cash cow is beyond milked dry.
Well, they're going beyond that even as well. They're trying to use it for messages and such that, yeah, Star Wars should have messages in it. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Lucas had a anti-war attitude. especially with the Vietnam War. He kind of made it known that the rebel versus the empire, especially with the Ewoks, had a little bit of the inspiration off of the Vietnam War, where you had this empire coming in with all this technology, us, and battling a bunch of people who were literally using bow and arrows. And yeah, the Viet Cong were using bow and arrows, and not and doing a pretty good job of it. Now, obviously, there's a lot more to it than just that. Again, it goes into politics, other type of politics. But no, Lucas obviously did have a little of a political bent in the storytelling that he had on there.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't one of those where I'm going to go and take the sledgehammer and pound it over your head. I'm going to make you think.
Exactly, which is again the same thing that Gene Roddenberry did with Star Trek, the original series.
Right, exactly. I mean, as it goes, Gene and George both, rest Gene's soul, very left of center. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. That's just them, right? But the thing is, both created great stories, great universes. To a point, competent writers, right? They knew the right people to help get them through, get the stories told, both of them, and started losing their way when they didn't have those voices around no more.
Right.
And that's just the evolution of things. But yeah, the people are so quick to say, and there are messages in there, blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, there's a difference between having a message and making you think and going out there and calling you a scumbag if you don't follow in goose step with everybody else. And that's a different thing. I mean, doing the storytelling, George Lucas knowing the evolution of storytelling. And I'm going to burst a bubble here because this even comes from Gary Kurtz. Who was a producer on the first two Star Wars films.
Okay.
And it's this. Everyone sits back and says about how George Lucas and Joseph Campbell in the Hero of the Thousand Faces and all his works. George Lucas didn't read Campbell's works until I start reading them until towards the end of Star Wars filming, right? The thing is he didn't need to read Campbell's works. Why? He lived Campbell's works in the sense of growing up with stories of knights of honor, the Kurosawa films with the samurai movies and such, the cowboy films, growing up with the westerns. Now, all these things that you're seeing in there, various other science fiction works out there. Frank Herbert completely believing that George Lucas ripped him off with Doom with Tatooine.
Right.
In that aspect, or that eventually with Coruscant becoming a world planet, Isaac Asimov with Trantor.
Mm-hmm.
You have that, but the thing is, in even his own life with going out there and racing cars, you see all these elements in Star Wars to one fashion or another. The things that George liked, the space opera. So he was getting it straight from from the udder, the teat. You didn't have to go to the store and buy the gallon of milk, which basically Campbell would be. Nothing to take away from Campbell, because obviously it's his essays and such that he's writing about it. Lucas was well educated in there. It just, if anything, Campbell helped let him know he was doing the right thing. And then what actually helped is when all you had these snotty people out there that were disparaging Star Wars as kiddie films, and it came to a point that they couldn't, these intellectuals couldn't hide it no more, that this is more than that. Then they started pointing fingers, saying, "Oh, Campbell, he's a student of Campbell. See, now we have validity. Now we can talk about it because we said the magic word, Campbell."
Yeah.
Which shouldn't be the case, right? It shouldn't be the case, but that's what it was, and that stuff kind of died now too. But that was the big thing, especially with the 20th anniversary of Star Wars. The magic, the myth, all that. He was on Moyers talking about Campbell. Campbell was on Moyers talking about stuff like. And again, it's not taken away from anybody. In fact, if the one thing is, it's the strength of what Lucas had. Now, what made things even better is all the people that were leading up to 91, and which is what I wanted to focus on there: comic book writers, and artists, novelists, and such. They had the same education. If these people were involved with superhero stories as much
Mhm.
as anything else, so they knew what a serial or a space opera or a science fiction opera was. In some ways, a superhero story, in a sense, is an opera esque type of thing, especially if we have multi-issue arcs on there. So you're already ingrained with legend and lore and myth. All they did was take what they already knew and bring into Star Wars and made that galaxy even bigger. And it didn't hurt that they went to the games and they kicked the doors open with the West End games, and Timothy Zahn, Kevin J. Anderson, uh, Barbara Hamley, uh, just trying Troy Denning, even though I'm not a big Troy Denning fan, but Troy Denning, all these others, when they were doing their books, and the authors of them all, again, expanding off of it because they're part of that circle of knowing what it's about. You see the people who are doing the writing today, like Chuck Wingding and the other, well, who isn't writing because he is such a moron that he didn't realize that going and attacking fans just to attack fans because they weren't worshiping the ground you walked on. And
Yeah.
the others, they don't have that education.
No,
They're
they
they're trendy fans.
right. Which honestly, that's part of the reason why this beginner series even exists is I want to reach out, whether it's Star Wars or whether it's another series, I want to reach out to the people that either haven't heard of this at all or perhaps only just have a surface level knowledge, and I
Right.
want to be like, here's everything that you're missing. Go check it out.
Well, I think the one important thing is to just remember what George Lucas wanted to do originally. Um, well, first, his first science fiction film, in fact, his first motion picture was THX 1138, a very
Right.
depressing dystopian science fiction film that didn't do well and basically pulled the wind out of the sails of Francis Ford Coppola's company he was trying to build up, American Zoetrope. Uh, but of course, he came back and did American Graffiti, which really got him solidified as, oh, this is an up and comer. But he wanted to do Flash Gordon. Why? Well, he grew up with Flash Gordon.
Hmm.
He didn't get the rights, obviously, and that's a great thing. The best thing that ever happened out there is that he didn't get the rights of Flash Gordon.
Right.
Was able to do,
Someone else did, and they got Queen to do it.
yeah. Well, that kind of funny thing is the estate, or the trust didn't sell it to him, and they're still sitting on it. Star Wars comes around, becomes a big hit, and then they go, well, maybe we should make a movie now. It's one of those things where the circle is now complete.
Exactly. Like, or another example, Star Wars, the original one, became such a success that Gene Roddenberry's like, you know what, we should make a Star Trek movie.
Well, I mean, they were planning on bringing back Star Trek as it was, and they were
Right.
with the Fifth Network and all that. It was actually Paramount that decided, hey, let's make it into a movie. Let's not do it because one, their fourth network fell through, the Paramount
Hmm.
network that they're going to do, and it's like, well, we got all this stuff in motion. Let's make a motion picture,
Right.
and so that helped. That helped them launch it into a movie franchise instead of going on television like it was originally going for as it was in the first place. But you'll notice one thing if you watch Space 1999, and especially some of the effects that they have in there, looks somewhat familiar, and sometimes some of the model making maybe,
Hmm.
because that's where some of the people came from that went to ILM. They worked on Space 1999, and then they went over to ILM, the beginning. John Dykstra who is the one that invented the motion cams and was the main instrument behind getting things going. Well, he left, went to Battlestar Galactica at Universal, got upset because they didn't come up with promises.
Yeah.
With that one,
Black Dragon's here mentioning both Battlestar Galactica and Buck Rogers coming out in 1978 because of Star Wars.
Right. And to be fair and honest, Battlestar Galactica was already in the works before Star Wars. It really was. Because that came out in 78. It was actually worked on, it was known as Adam's Arc, and it was already being worked on. But let's just put it this way. Star Wars didn't hurt. It really helped us make sure that it did get brought forward into fruition. Dykstra, of course, left ILM to go to that. Glenn Larson sold him a bill of goods. Dykstra didn't become a director like he was hoping to be. He left, which is why you could tell the differences on the special effects. Then he did Star Trek the Motion Picture. And then, of course, Buck Rogers followed up after that in 79. So, yeah, I mean, it was all kind of part of that boom they had going on there. I would say Buck Rogers was more of a child of Star Wars than Galactica.
Okay.
Two of them, because, as I said, it was already in the process. The Viper originally looked like Buck Rogers' fighter. That's what the original design. So what did they do? Well, they went with the Viper, which looked more, Star Wars-ish, and then the original design went to Buck Rogers. Boom, there it was.
Gotcha.
And all designed by Ralph McQuarrie. So Ralph McQuarrie was one of the great things on that aspect, that George was smart to deliver what to the execs what his vision was. He knew he had to do more than try to tell the execs. He had to show them. So Ralph McQuarrie did all the paintings that we all know. And of course, others going, hey, that's a great idea. So Glenn Larson did it for Galactica. They did it also with Star Trek the Motion Picture. So you see Ralph McQuarrie works on that as well, on both those items. I don't think he really worked much with Buck Rogers, though. So it's like boom, boom, boom. It started down that path of influencing. It wasn't necessarily copying, but it's like, hey, it's a good thing. Let's go with that. So boom, there you have it. So Lucas tried suing Battlestar Galactica. I think the reason why he went after Battlestar Galactica, on all seriousness, everyone wants to call it a Star Wars ripoff, but really, Star Wars and Battlestar Galactica is night and day. Battlestar Galactica, where you have this big galactic war with Star Wars with the evil empire. Battlestar Galactica was basically a retelling of the Mormon traversing across the United States, because Glenn Larson was a Mormon, and he wanted to tell the story of the Latter-day Saints as they're going across and trying to get to Utah. And it was, again, like I said, called Adam's Arc originally, and then it was changed to Adama. I think Lucas, what really hackled Lucas was Dykstra. Dykstra left him to work on that. And I think when it comes down to it, that was what it was. And it came down to a point that everyone across the line, way, including Lucas, knew that he didn't have a leg to stand on, and why it didn't go that way. So
going on from there, of course, we talked mostly about the stuff pre-1991, because, of course, that's what is highlighted the least. But, of course, the stuff that gets talked about from 1991 onward, there's a reason why everyone harps on that, just because a lot of that stuff is that good. Like, a lot of people, and I'm going to get your opinion on this, because this is a question, I'll admit, I've been kind of neglecting to ask with these beginner series, but that is, if someone wants to get into the EU of Star Wars, where do you start? I've heard a lot of people say that the best place to start is the Thrawn trilogy, and at least for me personally, it worked, but What about you? Where do you think the best place is to start?
Well, one, again, to answer the one question aspect or the statement you're making, why 91 on? Well, just the volume. And like you said, the quality and how everybody was wanting. As I said before, you only had a handful of books in a comic book series, really, uh, that kept Star Wars going for the first 10 years. And you didn't even have a role playing game until the 10th anniversary.
Mm-hmm.
But then it shows it's viable, and it's like, okay, let's go, go, go. And you started getting more and more books coming out. And then the rumblings that there's going to be a trilogy, the prequel trilogy. Now, yeah, I mean, as it goes, Timothy Zahn's, obviously, everyone's always usually going to say Timothy Zahn. I'm going to be slightly different. If you're going to be going fresh out of the frying pan, really, honestly, and you've never done EU before, get your hands on, and they're available out there, the daily books,
Okay.
right? Especially if you saw Solo. You're going to get these books, and you're going to read it. And you're going to realize why Brian Daly is the one that did the radio plays. You're going to find out why so many of his concepts that he has in there has gone into Disney. As you write it, you are literally just sucked into 1970s Star Wars. Right there. Boom, boom, boom. It is a great series. And again, as you can see, they're not huge books. Doesn't mean they're not good. It doesn't mean that there's not good stuff in it. But it's like there's no need to have a 400-page book. We're talking about Star Wars. It's supposed to be fun, fast, furious. Boom.
Right.
Let's get it done, folks. And Brian Daly does it. He has the best way of conveying that with let's put it down, especially back then, the two most popular characters, Han and Chewie. And so if you're looking for Empire, if you're the Empire, we're looking for Han Leia, the droids, whatever, they're not going to be there. But hey, if someone really did truly like the Solo film or thought that was okay, read this and realize what you got cheated out of, for one, and two, what good storytelling we did have there. So if that's the perfect, in my opinion, primer to the Star Wars EU. I mean, let's go right almost to the beginning.
Right.
Not even Splinter of Mind's Eye, and I consider Splinter of Mind's Eye a good book. Don't get me wrong, right? If you want to go a little bit newer, I mean, I suppose you got Thrawn Mania going on. So
True.
yeah, hit that Thrawn. That little pervert inside of me goes, yeah, read the Thrawn series and realize why us old timers are scoffing at what David Filoni is doing now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I only just recently read it about a year ago, and the Thrawn that I heard described in the audiobook, because that's how I did it. I did the audiobook. The Thrawn that I heard described in the audiobook is a whole different character. Like, he would kick live action Filoni's butt. Yeah. Or live action Thrawn. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Also, hello to Anonymous, who says, do you guys even know what you're talking about? Glenn A. Larson was a flaming homosexual drag queen, and BSG was about the gay experience in space. I'm detecting trace amounts of sarcasm in that comments.
I don't know. It's Anonymous. You never know. I mean, especially how he plays sports.
That is true. I mean, I had to find it, but there's this clip that applies.
Yeah, well, that's just like your opinion, man.
And I don't know how much time we got here. I'm imagining that we are kind of slowly coming to the end of our adventure here. But I got one thing I want to show you before we do go.
Can I mention the games real quick before we do?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so that's another important aspect of the EU too. It's not just mostly print media, whether it's books or comics. There was a heck of a lot of games that came out through the EU also. I mean, just looking through my personal Steam catalog here, excuse me. Yeah. But through my Steam catalog, the original Battlefronts, the two that don't get the classic collection. Do not do that. It's bad. It's a bad remake, but get the original ones because you can still find them for like $5 on Steam. But games like Dark Forces.
What's wrong with you? Yeah. Now that was a good remaster. That was a good remaster.
Dark Forces, Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2, Jedi Knight Mysteries as a Sith, Jedi Knight 2, Jedi Outcast, Jedi Knight Jedi Academy, both of the KOTOR games, both of the Knights of the Old Republic games, Republic Commando, both, well, I would really only recommend the first Force Unleashed game. I wasn't that big a fan of the second one because it was way too short. But again, and that's not even, I think, a third of them. What I would just recommended right there.
Well, Force Unleashed, what's very important and why that should be a canon thing is George Lucas was heavily involved with it, and it was basically something he wanted for Jet, his son Jet, to have. So George Lucas is very involved, just as he was very much involved with Shadow of the Empire. There's two things that Disney should never decanonize, it's those two. Because Shadow of the Empire was basically treated like a movie event without a movie. And very much so, I'm sure, giving, what would you say, seeing if we were interested enough to have not just the remasters, but a prequel trilogy. And it was hugely successful. So, and of course, again, Force Unleashed, he was involved. That was for Jet. So if people want to sit back and say things that George was involved, well, those two were things he was very much involved with.
Right.
With Shadow of the Empire to such a point that what was in those books, he put in the remaster of Star Wars. Dash Rendar's YT-2400, the swoops. Even Brian Daly with the Return of the Jedi radio play makes a mention of the stuff out of the Shadow of the Empire. So notice the name on that, by the way. Number 49. Marvel
The Last Jedi. Wow.
Even before the I believe Troy Denning did one that was called Last Jedi too, before Disney. But Last Jedi. Yep. There we go. And when it comes around the video games too, that's not counting the arcade games that we had back in the 80s.
I remember one that was around. It was like it was the arcade cabinet, but you had a joystick and like a throttle thing, and you're literally playing in the X-Wing shooting things down. And then in certain modes, you were Luke with your lightsaber taking on either Boba Fett or Vader.
Yeah, I think that was a later one too. Lot later one. But we had the first one that was really big from Atari was Victor Drawings, the line drawing, and you had like not joystick, but like steering type control for the X-Wing, but it was basically the going against the Death Star, and it had the sounds in there like "The Force will be with you always" and other things. Now, let's blow this thing and go home. They did an Empire Strikes Back one, which I never saw. I never saw that one, and they did a Return of the Jedi one, which was more conventional arcade game. But Parker Brothers came out with some for the Atari 2600. One of which was the Attack on Hoth, where you're flying your snowspeeder against the AT-ATs and trying to knock them all down. There was also one where you were lightsaber training, and you use that with the paddle, and two of you would try to shoot the remote, not to get shot by the remote and such like that. It's been a while since I got those games actually. I haven't played them in ages, but yeah. So yeah, video gaming goes all the way back to even the mid '80s,
right?
Even when the films were still in the theater. I think the Parker Brothers Empire Strikes Back one was actually the first one. So,
and of course, everyone knows
Jedi
about
Arena. Jedi Arena. Thank you so much, Jedi Arena.
And of course, everyone knows about the side-scrolling shooters that was, say, for example, A New Hope on the SNES.
Right. Mm-hmm. And that's basically, in some ways, that's what the Empire Strikes Back one was a side scroller. But you could go back and forth, but you had to try to stop them. Got to try to stop them. And then, of course, they kept on going faster and faster and faster. And when you knocked one down, there was another one there. It just never ended. Typical of games back at that time. So, yeah, it's video games and Star Wars go hand in hand all the way to almost the beginning as well. So, it's just amazing. None of this stuff is new. None of it is new.
Yeah. And I guess my closing statement is this.
Yeah.
Anything that Disney has done or is currently or will do with Star Wars, just remember, the EU probably did it first, and I almost could guarantee did it better.
Except for Crystal Star. Vonda McIntyre, that was probably one of the worst EU books ever. You can't change my mind. You can't change my mind.
Okay.
She's a great writer. She's a great author. She wrote great Star Trek novels, but her one outing in Star Wars was not good. So
I am sure. Well, guys, we're going to go ahead and shut this one down for the night. This one honestly went a little bit longer than I was intending, but you know what? That's just because it was that good of a stream, in my opinion. So much here to get into. We didn't even barely scratch the surface. We didn't talk about, like, the quote-unquote sequel trilogy stuff that happens after the Thrawn trilogy with, like, Cade Skywalker and the Yuuzhan Vong and all that stuff. So check that out on your own time. Baron, is there anything you want to talk about coming up with your channel?
Well, we got 7 o'clock Central Daylight Time on, of course, Phantom Legacy, which is right below my name. We're going to be talking about Season 5, Babylon 5, Part 2. In fact, I just finished watching 2 of the episodes for refresher today. Going to follow through, watch 2 tomorrow. And for my little refresher, and hope people will join me. Of course, I'll be hanging out around with Pop Talk Wednesdays at 5 o'clock Central Daylight Time, and Sunday at noon Central Daylight Time. That's at Pacific 414, run, of course, by Doc Pop himself, and of course, another gentleman by the name of Cash Monet of the Phantom Booligans. And then Friday on the Phantom Booligans, hopefully we'll be doing some gaming. That would be about 8:30 Central Daylight Time on the Phantom Hooligans. Or actually, I shouldn't say it's actually Phantom Hooligans, because there is the Phantom Hooligans out there, but I'll let Cash explain that. I don't care. And I think we're going to be doing Helldivers too. We're taking a break of Vermintide 2. Yeah, we need to. But
okay,
that looks like what's on my plate, unless things pop up before then.
Well, for me, we of course are having our pop-in stream Friday. Although I do got to mention, if I do not get this cold kicked by then, if it somehow gets worse, we'll of course push that back. But if everything goes well, we will be having our next pop-in stream this coming Friday. I've already got it prepped and ready on YouTube. The topic will be what makes good comedy. So definitely tune in for that. And next Wednesday is going to be part 3 of my series talking about Return of the King with Phil. And that's always going to be fun. And then from there, just gaming streams whenever I feel like it. So with that, guys, we're going to go ahead and shut it down for the night. So thank you, of course, to my guest, Baron Orman Tagge, for once again coming on here. We got to get another topic going so we can have you on here soon, okay?
Okay, more than happy to. Thank you. Thanks for having me. And thanks for everybody in the chat. We love you.
Yes. And so, real quick, Baron, since we're doing this simulcasting, why don't you do your outro first?
Hey, join me next time, okay? You know where to go. We love you. Do it. Come on. Don't let me down, man. Come on, man. Don't let me down.
Darren says, fun with Phil. Weird combo. That is true. But anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching. Make sure to hit like and subscribe if you haven't already. And just remember, And this especially applies because we're talking Star Wars tonight. Just remember, the Force is family. And we will see you guys later.